Good morning and welcome back to Arctic Frontiers 2023. It's still me, Andreas Raspotnik, your digital host. I hope you can see me. It's really hard to see the camera because there's some very bright light shining in my face. Final day of Arctic Frontiers this year. Still plenty to watch, plenty to learn, plenty to discuss. Today our focus is on energy, the future of energy and the future of science and science collaboration here in the Arctic. The questions we'll tackle when it comes to the energy is really, are we moving from that one source of energy mentality, oil, gas, hydrocarbons, to a more like a mixed solutions mentality and talking about off-grid solutions and how the Arctic can potentially be also a region of solution for the global energy problems and demands ahead. And in the final session, the science sessions, we'll really discuss more about how can we enhance science collaboration, what is the problem with facts in general, and how can we better communicate our knowledge here in the Arctic to not only an Arctic community, but also to an outside community. So again, welcome back, plenty to discuss, plenty to watch. I hope you have been following us on our online platform over the last 2-3 days. In case you have any feedback in that regard, please reach out to my team here at the Arctic Frontier Secretariat on what we could do better, when it comes to the online platform and the interactive engagement, hopefully with you as an online audience and us here in Tromsø. And of course, I'll see you soon here in Tromsø in about a year from now. So again, welcome back to the very final day of this year's Arctic Frontiers 2023 Moving North Conference. Enjoy and only the best from Tromsø and The Edge.
My vision for the Arctic is a community where growth, science and development is within nature's limits.
Science can provide a neutral space for collaboration, and this is indeed necessary to further our understanding of the global shared challenge of climate change and indeed how to tackle it.
Can science move the real world? Climate change, the competition for resources, an ongoing war in Europe. The extreme is here, now. To be a critical voice and give actionable advice. This is the balance academia is challenged to strike, facing the urgency of now.
Hello everybody and welcome to the final day at Arctic Frontiers, and in this first of our two big picture sessions today we of course are focusing on energy and the move to mixed solutions, which of course is hugely relevant to not just this region but the world as a whole as we accelerate the transition to greener, cleaner forms of energy. And Andreas is here manning the live stream today, and also Break TV, of course. And Andreas, I mean, the big question is what should be the strategy of Arctic countries locally, regionally, nationally, and internationally in this changed global environment?
You know, if I have the answer, I would be standing over there, you know, and not be the host, but be the keynote speaker. But of course, we have invited excellent guests that provide you with the answer and the solutions we are looking forward. You know, welcome everyone. Final day. Congrats to all of us. You know, it's Thursday, so I hope you're ready for a lot of solutions to tackle the challenges ahead?
Absolutely. We're going to be looking at solutions, and we're looking at some of the obstacles in the way. I think I introduced you to the concept of NIMBYism last year, not in my backyard. And we're looking at, of course, the conflicts that do arise when it relates to land use, traditional livelihoods, and biodiversity, all really, really important topics that are going to be included into this debate today because they are so crucial. How can the impacts of this energy transition be mitigated and approached in a really constructive way? Well, first of all, we're going to listen to some of the thoughts of the Arctic's emerging leaders.
Time is running out. We know that, and you know that.
This is why we're committed to a green shift in the Arctic, to provide reliable, affordable, sustainable, and inclusive energy.
Despite the time pressures to act, we need to consider the most ethical and sustainable way to move forward in the Arctic.
And how do we ensure that we leave no one behind?
Energy transitions come with risk. We want the autonomy to make informed decisions. As we know, energy development is not one size fits all, and there are many intersecting considerations.
Do we have the resources we need for this transition? And who bears the burden for providing them?
Indigenous communities are often accused of not in my backyard mentality.
But this is a Western interpretation which fuels green colonialism.
What could be the cumulative impacts and unintended consequences of our decisions now? What level of risk can be justified?
We need to meaningfully consider self-determination, cultural identity, economic sovereignty, and environmental protection for Indigenous communities.
Who get to decide what the Arctic energy transition is? And how do we ensure that our collective strategic direction is the right one?
And how can we make the right decisions without information that can be accessed, understood, and utilized by all?
We believe that braiding Western science with traditional ecological and Indigenous knowledge is the path forward for the Arctic.
In these complex systems, the more we know, the harder it gets. While acting with the speed and urgency that this crisis demands, we must consider these risks and address them to realise the optimal green shift in the Arctic.
Moving towards mixed solutions, how do we ensure a just transition?
So that is the big question. How do we ensure a just transition? And of course, energy security right now is a pressing concern as countries move away from that reliance on Russian oil and gas. There is this call for greater energy independence and for production to be brought much closer to the consumer and even generated by those who use it. But this shift to renewables does raise questions, so many questions that we've been trying to answer here at the conference and will do again today. But one of the big questions is, will it lead to fresh geopolitical fracture? Well, that is one of the topics that Olivia Lazard, visiting scholar of Carnegie Europe, Belgium, and Director of Peace in Design Consulting, will be talking about, as well as many others. So please do welcome Olivia up onto the stage to give her keynote speech about the danger zones of the green energy transition.
Thank you, Susanna. Thank you, Susanna. Thank you to the Arctic Frontiers Conference for bringing me for the first time to the Arctic. I'm going to pile up on what the emerging leaders have said, and to be frank, I'm not quite sure that I'm going to be able to say it any better. What I'm going to try and do, however, is give a more geopolitical and global backdrop to what is happening in the Arctic and what the Arctic's energy transition needs to look like. So I know that the theme of this conference is obviously moving north, but for the next 10 minutes, I'm going to take you south. Because indeed, if we want to understand what role the Arctic must play in the global energy transition and what its strategy must be moving forward for just and inclusive energy transition, we need to look at the global energy landscape, we need to look at the global geopolitics, and we need to look at planetary ecosystems. These three factors all combine together and tell a story of the future of global security. And obviously, when we think about global security, and obviously, when we think about global security today, we have to think about climate change. They said it before. We know that we have to move fast. What we tend to focus on a bit less is the fact that we have to decarbonize fast, well, for the future of the planet, and astutely for the future of peace and democracy, which are actually under threat as part of this energy transition, as opposed to a lot of different narratives that tell us that at the end point of energy transition, we will have more peace and more democracy. But the process of getting there is going to be a lot more stumbly than what was expected before. Why is that? Well, we have to look, if I can have the slides up. There you go. We have to look at what it takes to actually decarbonize. It seems very logical, and yet this has fallen out of public discourses for a really long time. In order to move away from fossil energy, we need to move towards mineral energy. And in order to build the vast amounts of clean techs that we need to decarbonize, we need vast amounts of critical minerals, many of them, over 50 different types of critical minerals, between lithium, rare earths, cobalt, copper, and these are only just to name a few. A conventional car, an electric car requires on average 6 times more material inputs than a conventional car with the current level of innovation. Electrical grids require 9 times more material input than thermal types of electricity systems. And we expect that in the next 2 decades, lithium and graphite, again, to name just 2 of those critical minerals, will require a 500% increase in demand in order to meet the needs of the energy transition. What does that mean? It means that we need more mines. It means, according to Benchmark Minerals, that we need to build at least 336 new mines by 2035, only to meet the demand for battery-related supply chains. I repeat, 336 new mines, knowing that it takes on average between 7 and 15 years for a mine to become operative and operational. What do these mines look like? Well, Dylan Marsh tells us they don't all look like this, but this is an open pit copper mine. What this work of art tells us is that in order to extract 10 grams of copper, we need to move 1 ton of soil. This is because the concentration of mines has decreased since we have mined our way through human history. The concentration of mines today is between 1% and 3% of ore on average for different deposits. That means that we need to mine more into the ground in order to extract usable material. This has vast environmental and ecological consequences, not just for the local people who are living around these mines, but for the planet, for the ecological services that actually regulate the global climate regime, as well as other types of ecological services, such as soil productivity and water productivity. And the problem is, one of the problems is that ecological costs are not very well estimated within our energy transition plans. In fact, ecological costs appear nowhere in IPCC reporting, to name just one key scientific document. Nor are geopolitical costs well estimated. What we do know, however, is that the energy transition is necessarily related to a global shift of power. What is at stake here? What we're discussing when we discuss a just and inclusive energy transition is the global balance of power. And the means to shifting the global balance of power in the current energy transition require 4 things related to critical minerals. 1, looking at where quality deposits are located. 2, who gets to mine them. Usually, even if you see some cobalt, for example, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the main mining industrial actors are not going to be Congolese, they're going to be foreign companies. The third one is who processes the materials and what kind of technology. How much are we investing into technologies that allow us to limit the environmental impact and to increase the social value with which we extract minerals? And the fourth aspect is who exports processed minerals and clean tech, at what cost, and with what geopolitical proposition. This is why in the OECD space particularly, we focus particularly on China. This graph tells you about the future of dependencies. On the top-hand corner, you've got where minerals are located. In the bottom graph, you've got where they're mainly processed. As it so happens, it is in China. China has been naturally endowed with critical deposits of rare earth minerals. China has been able, for the last 2 to 3 decades, to turn that into a significant competitive advantage by vertically integrating supply chains between extraction, all the way up to processing, all the way up to export, and to the design of innovative clean tech. This ability to process rare earths has been extended to other types of minerals, including lithium, graphite, only again to name a few. And in the last 10 years, what we've observed is essentially an ability of China to weaponize supply chains, including against countries like Japan and like Australia, and to use that to their competitive advantage to protect their own political model as well as their geopolitical influence. And today what we're seeing is a number of different developments. One is that China is in the process of merging the 6 most important rare earth processing and extractive companies in China so as to develop a monopolistic type of behavior on markets, which will have repercussions on global supply chains and on the ability to develop clean tech outside of China. The other thing is obviously that China doesn't intend on keeping this competitive advantage within China. It also needs deposits and minerals and other types of assets outside of its own territory. This is part of the proposition around the Belt and Road Initiative, with which it courts and tries to develop dependencies with other countries around the world, and with which it is able to acquire different types of deposits. That's why we see that China has moved into Chile, for example, to meet its demand around lithium, or Congo, where one particular Chinese company owns 15 of the most important cobalt deposits out of 17 active mines. And this is why we also see China moving into a country like Madagascar, which is an incredibly well-endowed country from a mineral perspective, which is also incredibly well-endowed from a biodiversity perspective. In Madagascar, China and some of its minor companies are extracting graphite, trying to acquire rare earth minerals, and are also developing new types of partnerships around geological surveys, including in the Mozambique channel, where we suspect that there may be some critical mineral nodules in the deep seas. But interestingly, and this is the part of the story that I really want to bring you on, in Madagascar, China is not the only geopolitical heavyweight who's active. In 2018, there was a presidential race in Madagascar. Russian oligarchs funded the current presidential, not just candidate, the current president at the moment, Mr. Rajoelina. By funding his campaign, Russian oligarchs secured the ability to strike a military partnership with Madagascar, a country which is not just well-endowed with critical minerals, but also with a strategic position within the Indian Ocean and within the Mozambique Channel. One of the additional perks of having supported the president in 2018 was for 2 companies named Ferrum Mining and Stork to acquire 3 of the main chrome deposits and active mine sites in the center of Madagascar. Chrome extraction has been a national pride in Madagascar since the times of independence. Ferrum Mining and Stork managed to negotiate an extraction price of about $70 a ton. And at the resale point to Chinese companies, they sold chrome per ton at twice or thrice the value. And when the Chroma mine went bankrupt, because the production price could not sustain the costs of extracting chrome, the Russian operatives who were deployed in Madagascar moved to the Central African Republic, because you see Ferrum Mining and Stork are 2 satellite companies of Wagner, a mercenary company which used the pretense of stabilization back in 2017 to come into the Central African Republic, offer mercenary and securitization services to the current president, President Touadéra. And once they left Bangui to move into the inner areas of the Central African Republic, they gained the upper hand over deposits of gold, diamonds, and some of the deposits that are much less well-known around rare earth, lithium, and cobalt. These are the gray points on the upper hand map here. And what you see in the map down there is a correlation between Wagner presence and high civilian casualties. They did not stabilize the conflict in the Central African Republic. They instrumentalized it. They managed to get into bed with a number of different armed groups, and through that type of strategy, they managed to have an oversight over traffic and illicit financial flows and different types of strategic locations, since the Central African Republic, thanks to its name, sits right in the middle of the African continent. Another thing that they've been doing more recently and that thankfully some have picked up upon, is that they have infiltrated Central African communities using Islamist methodologies to try and distill and disseminate Pan-African ideologies with the sole purpose to instrumentalize post-colonial wounds and to stir trouble between European peoples and African peoples. And they're not just doing it in CAR, they're doing it in Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Madagascar, in Chad, in Zimbabwe, in Cameroon, to name, again, only just a few. The deployment of tactics in the African continent is a mix of deploying securitization services and Praetorian guards to authoritarian leaders who want to propel their rule beyond the constitutional mandates. It is about spreading disinformation and misinformation bubbles in all of these different countries where rumor mills and disinformation is a conflict driver. It is about acquiring the means to essentially have information about where to place and how to position illicit financial flows, how to use cryptocurrencies to try and reinforce the ability of the Kremlin to work on building up its monetary reserves, and how to use corruption in a way that serves Russian interests. And the aim of these tactics is very much to secure commercial opportunities and routes, which is within the national security strategy of Russia, to try and undermine the power of the sanction system, to try and become a geopolitical power broker. And within that strategy and within those aims, the deposits of critical minerals serve a critical purpose, because it is about acquiring the means of becoming a power broker. And the Russian operatives don't need to actually exploit and extract those deposits, they just need to sit very warmly on them, because other energy-intensive countries such as the US, European countries, Japan, China, all want these deposits, not just the active ones, the ones that will serve the purpose of an exponential growth in demand. And by doing so, what Russia wants to do is to determine the pace of the transition, particularly in Europe, where there is a constitutional and binding agreement, thanks to the climate law, to decrease carbon emissions and to become climate neutral by 2050. If Europe, which is a country that doesn't have energy sovereignty and will never have energy sovereignty because energy sovereignty doesn't exist, if we do not pay attention to the future of energy dependencies without having a global and geostrategic outlook on what is happening today, Europe will be walking from one fossil dependency to another set of mineral dependencies. And by the way, the use of war in this transition is not random and it is not irrational. Not when one of the most resource-rich countries on the European continent possesses fossil reserves, uranium reserves, and quite critically, some of the most pristine mineral reserves around lithium and rare earths, particularly concentrated in the eastern part of the country, where Russia has spent the last 10 years trying to influence the way in which peoples in the eastern part of the country relate to their national state and to their identity and to their notion of belonging. The picture that I'm trying to paint here is one of a geostrategic buildup where corruption, violence, wars, history, narratives, and identities are up for grabs. And they're instrumentalized to secure the materials and the technologies of the future of the global balance of power. And the Arctic sits right in the middle of all of this. It is not marginal to this global competition. It is a key area where this competition is now taking place. The key question is how it is going to unfold. So, one of the key things, as the emerging leaders were saying before, that we need to take into account going forward is how, in this buildup of geostrategic competition, we're going to care and be very attentive to the future of planetary health, of democracy, and of peace. Why is that? And I will finish on that. Because for planetary ecosystems, what we need to realize is that what is at stake is not just the future of the planet. If you look at this map, the green dots tell you where a lot of the critical mineral deposits are located around the globe. I did not include the Arctic, apart from Greenland. They are located in a lot of fragile and conflict-affected states, which are sitting right at the center of this competition. Not just that, the future of planetary health depends on these ecosystems, which are going to come up in a second, thank you, which are highlighted in red and in orange. The Amazon basin, the Congo basin, the wet forests of Asia, and the deep seas, which are not coming up on this map. If you look at the previous map and this one, it will tell you that the mineral deposits are located in the very same ecosystems that are the lifeline of our planet and that are the lifeline of the climate regime. We cannot afford to lose them. This is why we actually need to have a global competition that will respect no-go mining zones. And this is a key point, which includes applicability in the Arctic. We actually do not know where we can mine without undermining massively some ecological services that help the planet to function and therefore that help human livelihoods and human societies and civilizations to sustain themselves. When it comes to democracies, we need to realize that we need to restore the integrity of politicians and of political and legislative and judicial systems everywhere in the world. We're facing authoritarian powers that are trying to break democracies from the inside out and from the outside in by attacking the very lifeblood of the global economic system and by trying to sort of tug and pull with different types of rules-based systems. This is why we need to invest collectively into new types of intelligence that mix climate science, Earth system science, as well as geostrategic transition profiling. We also need very strong partnerships, not just around the Arctic, but trying to understand, according to where we need to mine, how we need to establish partnerships and how we need to feed global supply chains and therefore the decarbonization efforts. And for peace, well, we very much need to realize that we're in the midst of a systems rivalry of planetary proportions. That means that we cannot afford to do business as usual, because what we need to do is indeed rein in a lot of economic systems and political systems within planetary boundaries. Norway and other Arctic states have a fundamental role to play in this transition, not just to accelerate towards their transition, but to do it in a way that is going to be astute, smart, and fast with regards to how to transition well within the Arctic in respect of planetary ecosystems and the Arctic ecosystems, and in partnership with other neighbors that are now becoming strategic partners in the energy transition. Thank you so much.
Take a seat on stage with me. Thank you very much. I'll just sit in the middle. Thank you. And please do also welcome up our panel of guests to discuss some of the topics that Olivia's been talking about there. Please welcome Secretary of State at the Ministry of Petroleum and Energy, Andreas Bjelland Eriksen. Welcome. Thank you very much. Also, please welcome Kjetil Hover, who is the Executive Vice President of Exploration and Production Norway at Equinor. Welcome. Also, please welcome Heather Shilton, Director of the Nunavut Nunatsiavut Corporation. Hi, Heather. Great to have you here. Please take a seat. Okay, so Minister, I'm glad you were able to watch the presentation from Olivia. I'd just like to get your first thoughts, really, about what you consider, to be the real threats and dangers of what lies ahead in this renewable transition.
So I think the last year really has shown us that we have to do a lot to speed up the transition. And I think everyone now understands that we need much more energy, renewable energy, and we need it fast. But I think a lot of people still has not fully understood everything that lies behind bringing that energy online and the dilemmas that are present in how to bring that energy online. We need to look at value chains. We need to look at where we get our resources from. We need to look at alternative places to get our resources from. Obviously, a starting point in terms of critical minerals is circular economy and getting that up and running fast, but that won't be sufficient to meet the demand and to be able to decarbonize, produce enough energy fast enough. So we need to do a lot at once. That is why we have started developing a potential for extracting deep sea minerals in Norway. That is still at a very early stage. There is a lot we don't know. We do not know at this stage whether this can be extracted in a sustainable manner. But I think with the backdrop that was presented, we have a responsibility to look into whether or not we can do that. And whether or not we can do that, the Arctic region is absolutely crucial because we know that it is this area where these potential minerals are present.
Okay, let me get the perspective from Hertel Hoover. You heard the presentation there from Olivia, some of her thoughts. Where do you see the threats are on the horizon?
Well, I think, Olivia, you had some really, really clear messages. First of all, the energy transition is going to require a lot of minerals. And I think that's something that we should all be aware of, and that has consequences. And I think during the last year, we have really seen the energy trilemma and how that impacts us and how we're able to handle that. And one of the key areas is supply. And then is the debate about, how are we going to organize and do the supply of minerals in the future. So to me, I think we need to organize how we are doing the supply chain in a clever way. And I think there's a lot of learnings to be done in how we have done it correctly within the oil and gas business. In Norway, there's a proud history of how we have organized the oil and gas, how we've been able to develop it, coexistence with others, and so on and so forth. So I think it's important for us to take the learnings from the history and bring it into the solutions for the future, because I think there are clear learnings to have.
Okay, thank you. Heather Shilton, what do you make about the landscape that Olivia painted, and how does that play into what you're doing at the Nunavut Corporation?
Yeah, so I very much appreciated the conversation around sort of the rebalance of power that needs to happen. And that's exactly what we're trying to do in Nunavut. So we're working on a community scale renewable energy project in the city of Akkarit. And in doing that, we're really trying to develop two sort of development streams that are happening at the same time, one of which is more technical in nature. We're looking at sort of the electrical modeling, economic modeling, resource modeling, all of that needs to happen, but then also working with our Inuit organization to collect Inuit knowledge and Inuit traditional knowledge so that we can build that directly into the development activities that are happening. And I think in doing that, we're really trying to flip development on its head and recognize, who are the stakeholders in this just clean energy transition and who are the rights holders, and how do we recognize who has the power right now and how do we shift that so that the rights holders, the people who have the inherent right to the land, water, and resources around the city of Akkarit and Inuit Nunangat in the region that we're working in, how do we make sure that rights holders have the power?
I mean, that's absolutely crucial, isn't it? Because this word NIMBYism is controversial, not in my backyard, viewed by some as really, we heard in that video, as green colonialism from some, and so you can understand that fully, that point of view, but obviously you do need to have change and development to try and enable the world to transition. What are you doing on the ground to kind of enable cooperation and collaboration?
So I think a lot of it comes down to actually integrating, not just prioritizing Inuit voices, but integrating that into the work that we're doing. And I think it's important to recognize that rights holders advocating for access to the land, water, and resources that they have an inherent right to is not NIMBYism. Mm-hmm. I think that's a completely separate conversation that is crucially important to the dialogue that we're having right now. So part of the work that we're trying to do is really advocate for rights holders and rights holding organizations to be able to access the just clean energy transition. And again, looking at that stakeholder versus rights holder, stakeholders are really, the permitting permitting authorities, the authority having jurisdictions, they're the ones who grant your permits, but they're not necessarily that rights-holding organization. So making sure that there's sort of a restructuring of the regulatory framework for this clean energy transition.
Part of what Olivia is saying is that there almost needs to be a bit of a pause, at least a go slow in this whole shift to kind of reassess priorities. Would you also say that's really vital on the ground as well, to make sure, as you say, that you're aware of all inputs and things like you don't just plough ahead?
I think to a degree that's accurate. I think when you're looking at a just clean energy transition, what is just often does take a little bit more time than what makes the most economic sense. Yeah. So that's exactly what we're trying to do now. And I think we are making some headway in Nunavut in the work that we're doing, and getting our funders and our financiers to understand that concept, that it could take a little bit longer to do that. But it's part of, again, that sort of restructuring of the regulatory framework to recognize that rights holders are the ones that need to have the power in this conversation.
So, Olivia, this is quite a hard sell from you. We know, and we've been talking right across this conference, that climate change is the biggest threat. I mean, you're looking at food production, you look at all sorts of areas right across the Arctic. Everybody is saying this needs to be tackled first, but you're telling people to slow down. That's a hard sell.
Well, I'm telling people to sort of look at the climate crisis in interdependency with other ecological crises. What I'm saying is essentially like we've had a very linear thinking looking at a CO2 problem or greenhouse gas problem without necessarily looking at the ecological integrity that we need to also regulate those gas fluxes and those ecological sort of complexities. We can't, let's make things very blunt. We cannot plunder the planet on our way to saving the climate. It's as simple as that, because we will actually make problems much bigger, much worse to solve if we do this. And this is why what Heather, you're saying is really important, because at the end of the day, the relationship to ecosystems is maintained, is midwifed by a lot of populations living next to or within those ecosystems. Either indigenous communities around the world, let it be in the Arctic or in the Amazon basin, for example, but also trying to sort of move towards, for living populations that do not define themselves as indigenous or do not have this relationship to the land, in the way that is a lived experience, we need to move closer towards this. And this is what will allow also to rationalize the way in which we do economic modeling. The part which is complicated is indeed that we have a tension between the local level, which is indeed plowing ahead with what it means to steward and live in the land or within ecosystems in a much more sustainable way. But if we look at the geopolitical and geostrategic competition, the impetus becomes, let's keep on plowing ahead and develop economic growth because this is what will allow us to compete.
So do you think, Minister, that, State Secretary, that competition should be de-escalated then? How can you do that? Should there be no-go mining zones, for example, set up across the Arctic?
First and foremost, it's always nice to get an upgrade.
Yes.
But I think absolutely we need to look at certain areas and determine whether or not those areas are going to be exploited, for example, to get minerals. And this has been really the resource management in Norway for a very long time. If you look at the Norwegian continental shelf, we have always been able to find areas where we perceive that we can develop the sector in a sustainable manner, that we can have the right balance between coexistence, nature, and economic perspectives, the need for energy, and the ability to work together between different partnerships, environmental organizations, the industry itself, public bodies, to be able to create that framework where that can be done in practice. So this is absolutely the same approach that we will have to take, for example, in getting sufficient minerals going forward. And the not so nice thing is that that is an approach that takes a bit more time than just plow ahead, go forward. But it's the only way to set up a sustainable framework going forward. So I absolutely agree in the perception that in the attempt and the crucial attempt to meet our climate targets, we will have to avoid creating even bigger problems for ourselves.
So you say, Norway wants to go green, but you keep exploiting oil reserves. Is this the right balance?
I think the world we live in right now show how difficult it is to transition energy systems. It really tells the same story as the difficulty about the way we need to look for minerals, for example. If oil and gas goes offline the next 10, 15 years, it's probably replaced by coal. That's not better for the climate. And that does not mean that we should not transition towards renewable energy as soon as possible. And I hope that Europe managed to do that as soon as possible as well. But the resource management from the Norwegian continental shelf is such that in 4 or 5 years, gas production from the shelf will fall. So if we don't explore, look for more gas, develop new fields, then in 5 years' time, we deliver less gas to Europe, even though by any probability measure, Europe probably is going to need that gas also in an energy transition.
Yeah, I think the transition is the key, isn't it? Herta Kluiver, what is Equinor's role really during this current energy crisis? Do you see it, in two ways, really?
Yeah, it's extremely important. It has become critical, and I'll comment on that. But I'll also want to comment on Andreas, because there's a lot of debate about oil and gas, and the energy system needs to transform. We need to have more greener energy, but the speed of that and then doing that in the right way is crucial for the people in this on the earth. So it's about how are we able to transform. How are we able to continue to develop oil and gas, but also then to also develop new energy sources? And if we're not doing that correctly, I think that's going to be quite challenging for the world. And basically, that's what we have seen in Europe the last year, that we need to do this in the right way. And that's really what we as a company are working on, to become a broad energy company, having renewables, having low carbon solutions. But in the period, we still need to produce as low as possible CO2 emitting oil and gas. You asked me about the position we as a company have had in the energy crisis. And as I said, it has been extremely critical the last 12 months. During the 12 last months, Norway and Equinor has been the single most important supplier of energy towards Europe. And that is a responsibility that I know that the Norwegian government is taking very seriously, and we are doing the same. That's a large burden, or what you call it, on us as a company, as Norway as a nation. And we as a company, as an industry, has been working extremely close with the government to look at what can we do to produce more energy to Europe, to replace the lack of energy from Russia. And I'm proud that I've been a part of an industry which we have been able to increase the gas supply with 10%, being able to replace some of the gas that is not coming from Russia. And you should also know that almost all the oil that we now produce in Norway is going to Europe. So Norway is exporting 2,500 terawatt of energy to Europe, which is really, really needed. And we believe that we need to do this in the short term, in the medium term, in the long term. However, Norway is also going to play a critical role in the energy transition, because we have a lot of opportunity that we could supply to Europe. It's about how to decarbonize the energy system and Europe. And it's about CCS and it's about hydrogen. So, yeah.
I'm just mindful of the clock as well, and we've got a couple of questions to come in. This question, we have alluded to it already and talked about it, but another direct question: when will fossil fuel companies start divesting from fossil fuels to stop fueling the crisis? And why is Norway opening new oil and gas fields in 2023? State Secretary, could you take that one?
I think Equinor can answer on the transition, but I will say also that Norway, as an energy partner for Europe, has also already started the transition. We work closely. When the German Vice Chancellor visited Norway earlier this year, we signed an agreement on the development and looking into the development of a hydrogen infrastructure to Europe, for example. So this transition has already started, but it will be a gradual transition, and that's really the important point here. Transitioning our energy systems take time. So although we are going to transition away from fossil fuels, and we need to do that as soon as possible, we also need to do that in a manner that ensures that Europe has sufficient energy, because I am afraid of a situation where Europe runs out of energy. That will not be good for our climate targets for the transition in the long run. So we have to be able to do two things at once, and that is the only way to manage a successful transition going forward.
Hertha.
No, I agree, and I think, yes, we need to have an energy transition, but if you are only working on the supply side, I think this is not going to be beneficial for Europe. You need to look at the demand. How can we switch from using oil and gas to other energy sources? That is where we need to work. And if we're taking away the supply too quickly, the situation is going to be critical in Europe, as you alluded to. So, yeah.
Olivia.
I very much agree, and again, this is where I see the reconciliation also between Heather, what you've been saying, and this sort of larger geostrategic discourse that we've had. But we need to ensure, indeed, that we work on transforming this demand in Europe, because this is where you're providing, essentially. But we also need to make sure, and I'd like to offer, this thought very humbly, that Norway moves a lot of its investments around its sovereign fund critically towards critical mineral extraction, research around what that means for ecological, integrity, and how to move that forward in a space that respects also in that sort of that serves European security. And this has not been the case in the last decades, really. And so that is the sort of balance that needs to be moved as well in terms of how to rely on fossil rents and then move them towards a more sustainable type of business model at a national level as well.
State Secretary, do you have anything to add?
I think that you've seen over the last couple of years that the Sovereign Fund, as an example, has really developed new strategies for how to follow sustainability, the green transition, etc., and the kind of information that they require the companies that the Sovereign Fund is invested into to provide. So capital, and also state capital, has absolutely a role to play in driving this transition in a sustainable manner.
Okay, I want to bring back Heather in, because obviously you're looking at energy security on the ground, aren't you? What else needs to be done to achieve these goals?
Yeah, so we're seeing a lot of similar things happening in Nunavut, where we're still 100% reliant on diesel, all 13 communities in the Kekitani region. And the federal government is directly funding new diesel power plants still to this day. And so there's one sort of monolith entity within Nunavut that's responsible for power generation, distribution, sales, energy policy, and energy regulation. And so when there's new entities coming in, I work for an Inuit organization who's trying to bring renewable energy to Nunavut. And we're looking at subsidized diesel versus unsubsidized renewables. Subsidized diesel is going to win every time, and we know that. So what we are really advocating for is, again, that sort of shift in the regulatory structure to really prioritize, to integrate Inuit voices, and making sure that rights-holding organizations who are trying to bring this energy transition into the territory are prioritized just as much as what's happening in that sort of government.
So is the technological barrier, do you think, lower than the policy barrier in many ways?
Very much so, yeah. There are successful projects across the Canadian Arctic related to renewable energy integration into isolated diesel microgrids, so we know that that's not as much of a challenge as these policy barriers that we've been trying to break down for years. So I think that's really the focus that we need to shift on, is making sure that we're setting up these market structures and these regulatory structures to bring in that just clean energy transition.
Okay. And Hertha, I just want to look a bit towards the future, and with this shift and this acceleration, do you think it will encourage more younger people to want to get involved in jobs at your company? Because I know, for example, oil and gas hasn't looked as attractive as it used to decades before.
First of all, Equinor is one of the most popular employers in Norway, so it's great to be in that position. And I think when we say that we want to be a leading company in energy transition, that is, the young people would like to be a part of that, and being a part of a company that is having a broad energy supply. So yes, I think that's making us more attractive to young people. But it's also important to remember that if you want to be a part of the energy transition, also contributing to making the oil and gas business even better is also helping on the solution. So for us, it's about increasing our efforts within renewables, low carbon and so on, but it's also about doing what we can on the oil and gas. And I think that is attractive for young people.
I mean, ultimately, Olivia's kind of alluded to the fact that there is a muddled situation emerging, whereby, you know, we need mineral extraction, don't we, for this green shift? But do you think it potentially could really risk fresh geopolitical fracture down the line? What needs to be done, do you think, on an international level, State Secretary, to prevent that, you know, in terms of that strategic eye on the future?
If I could give you a very clear-cut answer to that, I would probably be rich, because someone will pay me a lot to create a good strategy for that. But I think what is challenging with the geopolitical situation that we see right now is that everything is uncertain on many levels. We see that the US moves to reduce their independence on China, but it has also created fractions towards Europe and towards Norway to a certain extent through the IRA package and the requirements for local content, etc. So we see a deglobalization that is in isolation not good, because the climate risk and the risk of loss of biodiversity, etc., is a global concern. So we need to work together in global structures to meet a lot of those targets. So it's not easy. I think we will see a situation going forward where we will have more regional cooperation, and done right, that is better than only cooperation on a national level. Mm-hmm. But it is going to be a real challenge, and we will have to set up new value chains, for example, getting new sources of critical minerals, to make that as one example. And that is sort of a move and a transition going forward that I think it's difficult to get out.
Okay, well, many thanks for all of your insights. Olivia, it's been great to have you as the keynote speaker to really kind of jolt us into thinking about the broader perspective. So thanks very much for all of your contributions. It's been great. Thank you. So if you'd like to move off that way, and I'm going to welcome the next panel, so thanks a lot. Thank you. So it is clear from what we've heard there on that panel that the green transition is going to cost in terms of biodiversity and nature, as well as geopolitics as well. So how do we cope with this? And actually, what measures are needed more on the ground? And what do we need from policymakers to ensure that there is a smoother transition, to enable local communities to come up with their solutions, and to ensure that regulators are very supportive of this? So we're going to look at some of those possibilities that communities have been pursuing right now across the Arctic and other regions as well. What role energy education plays, that's crucially important, and also look at the issue of access to funding as well. So I'm going to invite the next panel on stage now. Please welcome Sigurd Eng from Bellona, who's a senior advisor at the foundation. Hello there, Sigurd. Also, hello, welcome. Hello. Also, please welcome Charla Greenland, co-chair of the Gwich'in International Council. Welcome, Charla. Welcome, please take a seat. Yes, here. Thank you. Please welcome Chris Rose, Executive Director of Renewable Energy at the Alaska Project. Hi, Chris.
Hello.
Nice to see you. Please take a seat. Heidi Teresa Oz, who's Head of Business Development at Stora Norsk Energy. Hi, Heidi. Hello, welcome.
Thank you.
And also James Stocken, Political Leader of the Orkney Island Council. Islands, I should say. There's more than one.
Yes.
Hi, James.
Hi.
Welcome. Okay, so first of all, Sigurd, great to have you here, because I know you couldn't attend last time. So just want to get your quick perspective there on what you heard from Olivia. And what do you think your take is in terms of specifically what she's talking about, biodiversity and nature as well?
Of course, it's two different perspectives, the Arctic perspective and the global perspective. And I'm not afraid of the change in the Arctic, concerning the rare minerals, for example. I think it's possible to find this in the market. And what thing she didn't talk about is the circulation, the circulative, how to reuse the minerals. Of course, it will never be 100%, but we have a long way to go to end this. So I'm not afraid of that. In the Arctic, I'm not afraid of the technology either. I think the technology will appear when we need it, and the last 10, 15, 20 years show that it is true. And the problem is the lack of energy, alternative energy, and how to build out this kind of production. And of course, the economic part is of the same value, because I think the global community needs to see that it has an interest in bringing the Arctic into a green future faster than the rest of the world. That means very fast, ultra fast, simply because you have a double motivation. You cut the climate emission, and you cut the emission of soot and material, so you don't colorize the ice and get it melted and so on. So it's to help the Arctic, brings the whole world to a better place.
And of course, we're really focusing on mixed solutions and finding out kind of best practice and examples right across the region. So I want to bring in Charlotte Greenland, co-chair of the Gwich'in International Council. Charlotte, please, can you tell us a bit more about yourself, really, and also really what your starting point is here?
Merci. Van Gwynzi Shulakat. Charla, she Charla Valji, Shakai Pating Miak, Shahan Bala Greenland Vaji, Shati Freddy Greenland Vaji, Shahan Old Crow Gwitset Nali, Shati Aklavik Gwitset Nali, Shitsu Ellen and Robert Bruce Old Crow Gwitset Ginli, Shitsi Bala J and Joe Greenland Aklavik Gwitsit Shataivo Gwonli. So good day, my friends. My name is Charla Greenland. My husband is Pat Tingmiak. My parents are Freddie and Bala Greenland of Aklavik, Northwest Territories. My mom is originally from Old Crow, Yukon, which makes me both Vantet and Editet Gwich'in. My maternal grandparents are the late Ellen and Robert Bruce of Old Crow, Yukon, and my paternal grandparents are the late Bala J and Joseph Greenland of Aklavik. I'm happy to be here today and proud to introduce myself in the Gwich'in way that was taught to me by my grandmother. I serve as the co-chair for Gwich'in Council International, which is a volunteer board. In my day job, I'm the chief operating officer for the Gwich'in Tribal Council. We express our gratitude to the organizers for inviting us here today. And I'll just be sharing some of GCI's Gwich'in Council International's work to move to mixed energy solutions and highlighting examples from some of our Gwich'in communities.
So what would you say is the starting point, really, to move to mixed energy solutions?
Well, I think it's important to understand who the Gwich'in communities are, so I'll start there. As a nation, our communities, people, and land base and language extend across present-day Alaska, Yukon, and the Northwest Territories. Sorry, I have a lot of notes here.
That's great, and so do I.
And as a nation, we are strongly tied to Vitsai, or the Porcupine Caribou herd, and we are guided by Gwich'in values and our Gwich'in knowledge. We acknowledge the importance of our elders and our youth, and the ongoing work to reclaim identity, rights, and language. The Gwich'in Council International was established in 2000 and has permanent participant status in the Arctic Council. Our member organizations are the Council of Athabascan Tribal Governments and the Vantet Gwich'in First Nation and Gwich'in Tribal Council. Our mission is to amplify the voice of Gwich'in Nation on issues of sustainable development and the environment in international fora. Our vision is vibrant, resilient, and prosperous Gwich'in communities throughout Alaska, Yukon, and Northwest Territories that stand together with one voice internationally to respond to shared challenges and opportunities. So I just wanted to start with the to give people a better sense of who we are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so your general overview, just how important is it right from the start? And we've heard that on previous panels, and we've heard that as well from Hella, that sometimes you kind of need to press pause and go slow to make sure you've got all the right voices at the table right from the beginning when you're starting in this transition to mixed solutions. You know, what's your approach?
I'm a little...
I mean, if you've got any examples of say, best practice where it's really worked for you?
Well, given the climate crisis and the dependence of many of our communities still on diesel, like Heather had mentioned, we have advanced solutions to promote energy security, sustainability, and sovereignty. But the starting point really comes from the Gwich'in communities themselves. Heather alluded to the fact that it's not just about including the Indigenous voices, but that Indigenous voices need to be the lead. We're the ones that have lived there for millennia. We have gone through the effects of colonization, the trauma of colonization, and and we need to learn from that. And you know, green energy is very important, but if it is coming to the communities in the same way that Indigenous people have always been treated, that's just another form of colonization. So that's the starting point for us, is that we are not only part of the conversation, but that we are leading it.
Great, okay. Well, let me bring in Chris Rose now, Executive Director of Renewable Energy Alaska. And thank you so much, Charla, for all of that great introduction, because it really does help set the scene. So, Chris, you know, we've talked a bit about, funding education and training and what form should it take. It's clear that, you know, that education needs to completely take on board, you know, what Charla's saying, that even the education needs to be, it can't be top down. The education has to be planned really from the bottom up, or from the centre out, you should say.
Absolutely. First, a little background on Alaska. We're 4 times the size of Norway, roughly. We have about 730,000 people. We only have one grid that connects the Anchorage, Fairbanks area, and we have about 250 remote communities that have no connection to any transportation or transmission hubs. So we have those 250 remote communities that are mostly Indigenous people who are reliant completely on imported fossil fuel for both heat and electricity. So our NGO over the last 20 years has been learning how to make energy efficiency and renewable energy projects in these communities succeed. Back in 2008, we were able to get the state to create some new programs for energy efficiency and renewables that resulted in almost $1 billion in grant money that built about 70 renewable energy projects in these microgrids and weatherized over 50,000 homes. But we soon realized that grant money and even improving technology is not going to be the success that you need. You have many other things that you have to have in order to have a holistic approach to these communities. And so for the last 10 years, we've been really focused on culturally relevant and also place-based K through 12 math and science education to promote energy literacy, so people know where their energy comes from and understand the implications of all the energy decisions that they make. And we've also been both establishing and joining a variety of training and technical assistance networks so that people in local communities can really start to take control of their own energy destiny. More recently, we've been focused on the establishment of a green bank to develop affordable loan programs for small and medium-sized projects that can't get any financing, and that is more policy work to reduce our dependence, even though on fossil fuels. Even though we produce a lot of oil and gas in Alaska, we never have gotten hometown discount. So we have very expensive energy prices in Alaska, and we're hoping that the optimization of these remote community projects that we have will actually help the estimated 800 million people on the planet that are reliant on diesel to be more energy secure, and the billion people on the planet that have no electricity at all by using local renewables.
It's really interesting what you said there about helping people take control of their own destiny, or allowing people to take control of their own destiny. That's certainly what happened in the Orkney Islands, isn't it? Hasn't it been, James? Tell us a little bit more about what the Orkneys have done in terms of creating energy security for themselves and how it was completely driven by the people living on the islands.
Yeah, but I think I'll take you back a step into the previous discussion that was here when we were speaking about no-go areas for mining. My little town of Stromness lives right on top of a rich vein of uranium. And way back, 40 years ago, we protested because people had sold the rights to Rio Tinto Zinc. And we took that to our local council to get a bylaw passed so there could be no mineral extraction on the islands. And that galvanized people to work together. But we had to find other solutions in energy, and our community has really taken the lead. This is very much from the bottom up. These are passionate people looking to change things, and it's that quadruple helix of the academics and the government and the businesses, but most of all the community driving a program to say, what can we do? How can we do it? And so for the last 30 odd years, we've been in this space of doing things differently. We had the first grid-connected large wind turbine in the world back in the 80s, and we saw the benefits, and everybody saw that's the way forward. So we have done it, but it's multiple areas, and by 10 years ago, 1 in 12 of our population had their own renewable device. We were 100% sufficient for renewables in electricity, and communities had clubbed together to invest in programs to put up devices, and we're very much exploring many different vectors in this, whether it's wave, tidal, whether it's solar, wind, and we've come to the point, and then we came to a huge pause because the grid couldn't hold any more power. We export more renewable energy than we use ourselves, but that's not the end of the story. There's much more to do now and to go into the future so that we can really contribute. Our ambition is net zero by 2030, and the community and the council have come together collectively to invest in renewables to secure that position, but we still have a long way to go to decarbonise.
Well, it's amazing how far you've already come. And let me bring in Heidi now. Heidi, can you tell me a little bit about your experience in the move away from coal?
Yeah, so we are on the move towards a mixed solution, and we are looking at it from two angles. Firstly, we have acquired a small off-grid energy system, which we use as a pilot. We implement renewable sources, storage systems, and smart control. What we see there is that we can reduce the amount of diesel significantly. So to just underline what's been said a lot of times here, the technology is not the main barrier. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, of course, verification of different types, but it's solvable. The other angle that we are working on is that we're very engaged in what happens in Longyearbyen, where we are doing the planning for the transition. We are putting the spotlight on what also Heather said in the first heat here, the need to restructure the regulations and the need to do that early on, defining the roles, getting good tariff structures that gives the market and the players the right incentive to do the investments that's needed to move to a mixed green solution.
Let me bring in Sigurd. Sigurd, do you think these plans for this low-emission power plant in Longyearbyen are the solution for urban areas in the Arctic?
I hope so. I'm, as everybody else, just predicting how the future will become and have a will of that. And I believe that this can be a facility that can be replicated around the Arctic. Now in May, Norway takes over the leadership in the Arctic Council, and it's a tradition that all the nations that has the leadership have a special prestige project that I lift on because of the technology or the includingness for the community or whatever. And I think that if the Norwegian government are afraid that they said that they are afraid that Europe run out of energy, fossil energy. I'm not that afraid, and I hope it's not the same situation in Longyearbyen, that we are afraid that they don't get enough renewable energy. That's the main thing.
Mm-hmm. So we're hearing quite a few examples already, about what can be done. Charla, I wonder if you could perhaps share some of the best practice and best examples actually with the community level and internationally as well.
Sure, and we like using the term wise practices because it's different for every location. In Old Crow, Yukon, which is Vantutkwichun, for example, the government there, the indigenous government, they have developed a solar energy field within the community that is helping to get the community off of diesel. And that was something led by the community, and of course bringing partnerships in. But you needed to have that community buy-in because where it's placed is right in the berry patches. So that was something that people had to be part of. In my area, we are currently, retrofitting or redeveloping a Gwich'in Wellness Camp that is about 15 kilometers upriver from Inuvik. And at one point, that was totally run by diesel. And it just became too much for operational costs. So we've spent about the past 10 years working in partnerships and leading those partnerships with bringing mixed renewable energy in the way of solar power, biomass furnace, to have that facility as much as possible totally off diesel. And then, of course, as my colleague here spoke about education, with Arctic Council, we've led something called the Arctic Energy Community Planning and Implementation Toolkit. That's something that's totally free and available online, and we've been sharing that information and actually just had a conference in the Yukon, and Heather, who was just up here, was actually part of that, and that just really it involves community members at a very practical level as to how to rethink energy.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting as well, and you're talking about all of that and all of those different examples, and many of the communities are pretty remote, I imagine, so it's quite a lot of responsibility. I imagine you take on quite a lot of responsibilities yourself, but Chris, have you found that there are lots of hats being worn in some smaller communities? Does fatigue end up setting in, perhaps, that people think, well, I just can't take on this as well. I'm already, running the store and I'm running this, and I can't be the head of renewable energy as well.
Yeah, I've learned a lot at this conference, and one of the things that I really loved hearing the other day was the Icelandic foreign minister saying that we have unlimited human potential. And that's what we really have to focus in on these communities, because it's true, a lot of these communities have 5 or 6 people who are wearing 4 or 5 hats. And if you bring in a new energy solution to the community and say, here, please do this, this will really help you, they're like, well, I'm already overwhelmed, I can't do that. And so moving the people in the community into places where they can help those 5 or 6 people is really one of the most important things that we can do. There's literally dozens of other people in the community who could be taking on more responsibility, but they have to start somewhere. And that starts with energy literacy, it starts with training, bringing training to the community, not saying, please go to Anchorage and leave your family for 6 weeks and don't get paid, but we'll figure out a way to bring the training that you need into the community. And not just on operations and maintenance, it's bookkeeping, it's management of the utilities, a lot of different things in the community that are part of the success for a utility. And also just getting people to do something that they can do at home, which is just be more energy efficient. And that's always the thing we ask people to consider first, is just being energy efficient. So there are many things that I think we can do to build that human capacity. And of all the work that REAP does, I think we're focused most, both with staff time and all the hours we put into things, is on the people of these communities.
James, is that your experience as well, that perhaps sometimes a bit of fatigue sets in, or do you think people are still powered up to to take on the challenge?
Well, I think that, as in all small communities, people do wear a lot of different hats. I'll take one small island that we have, the island of Ede, and it has about 140 people on it. But they set together to invest in a big wind turbine for themselves. Then there's wave energy, there's a tidal energy contributing there. So they've set up an electrolyzer, they're making hydrogen, they're looking at other kinds of experiments. And yet fatigue does come in, but if they know that they are getting the advantage at the other side, they will enlist a support from others. And they also work among our islands to share their knowledge, and they come together. And I think that's one of the things that's really important, that people learn from other people's experience. It's the dialogue, it's the encouragement. And that's why one of the reasons I'm here is because I would want to encourage other communities, but I also still need help. We still have things to do. We still have things we want to co-produce. We still have the next stage to go on to, whether it's decarbonising ferries or looking at the project we have on our airport, where we're looking at, low carbon flights and harsh weather environments. We need to make sure that we link up with everybody else that's doing that, because there's no point in everybody discovering the same thing 2 or 3 months after each other. We've got to cooperate and collaborate to make sure that we can achieve things faster.
And where are the obstacles to you achieving things faster? Does it come actually from national government sometimes, or regulators?
Well, I think that Heather began that conversation, and then we heard it, from what's happened in Spalberg. All the regulation has been written looking from the centre out. This is an opportunity from us from the periphery in. We've got to reimagine. We've got to rethink.
Or maybe they should think they are the centre and we're the periphery. And change
you're quite
tack.
right. We've got to work together to make sure that there is a chance. So my call on the UK government, who still have all control of energy policy, shipping, aviation and things, is to say, can we get a flexible space? We don't want to change regulation. We want to flex it so that it's right for us, so that we can do things quicker. So that's my request for them. We need special status, we need special areas, but also we need to know if there's people doing things similarly elsewhere, that if they get a concession, for us to ask for that same concession.
Mm-hmm. And talking about learning from different communities and different companies doing ways in novel ways. Heidi, what's your experience in terms of where you should start when you're really taking these first steps? Should it be finding the right technologies, or actually setting up a market structure in the first place?
Yeah, I think the panel has answered that quite many times. You should definitely start with the market structure, because you have to design the technology mix to fit the need, the market. But I want to build a bit on what James is saying, because it makes me so happy that that's one of the main topics on this session: cooperation, sharing knowledge. There are 1,500 off-grid locations in the Arctic. I've learned 250 of them are in Alaska. And we don't need to do the same mistakes over and over and over again. So we are, at this moment, we're very focused on documenting the processes, what is working, what is not, to try to make a best practice for the Arctic communities all around. And I have to be honest, when it comes to indigenous people, we don't have them at Svalbard. So I think going into good partnerships together, we can bring the funding, the financing, we can bring our experience, and then we need to communicate and cooperate to bring in also the local perspectives all over.
So Charlotte, what tools and supports do people need to make all of this work?
It's going to be different for each community. every area is different based on the history that they've come from, the cultures that they come from, the colonization that is in the, that has been in the past, but that is still current. So that's why these partnerships are just so vital. And for us, energy solutions aren't just about economy, or it isn't just about the environment. It's the ripple effect across the whole communities. It's health and wellness. It's mental health. It's the reclaiming of cultural identity. Self-determination is something we work really hard on, and that's our driving goal. And very much green energy aligns with my values as a Gwich'in. We need to live in harmony with the environment, so we're very much about being partnerships in these solutions. But moving forward, it's vital, if we don't want to repeat history, that Indigenous people are, at the table, but also leading these initiatives.
And Sigurd, I just want to just look at this. We're very on the local level, which quite rightly we should be, but also, do you think so there is a lot of emphasis on what the Arctic should do and what communities in the Arctic, their responsibility, rather than looking at what the rest of the world can do to help the Arctic?
In the center of this, of course, we have something called the Arctic Council, which, by coincidence, I don't know, but the majority of these nations is oil-producing nations. So as the biggest barriers to the green shift in the Arctic is oil and gas exploration and in the future. So I think that this Arctic Council needs to widen out their workspace from resilience and preparedness, which is necessary, it's good, and so, but we need to make committing cooperation where coordination and cooperation is the main things between the Arctic nations.
And Chris, looking at the national level, do you think there is the danger in politics? It's always short-term wins. And we need a long-term vision, really. How do you get there? How do you kind of get past the politics, really, to ensure the projects which really do need that a long-term really project management are able to be delivered?
Well, the United States really doesn't have an energy policy for consumers. Neither does the state of Alaska. We have this new law that people have heard about, the Inflation Reduction Act, $370 billion for clean energy and climate, and that's big, but it's, again, written from the center, not for the people out on the periphery. So just understanding how all of those subsidies and tax credits and programs can impact people who live above the Arctic Circle is a job in and of itself. But working with people around the country is important. We are part of a knowledge sharing network that is national that the Department of Energy set up a couple of years ago. We're one of the regional partners for that, and we bring in the national laboratory expertise to these small communities. So we actually act like a liaison between the national labs and Department of Energy and all these communities that have really no relationship with those labs. So there's a lot of things we can do like that, but I'm excited to find ways to partner with the people here.
Mm-hmm. And James, I just want to get your perspective on a little bit about what we heard right at the beginning with Olivia. When she made that keynote speech talking about the dangers ahead and this over-reliance on the rare earths and minerals we need to power the green shift. Do you share her concerns, or do you think there is another way? I mean, Sigurd's alluded to the renewable factor in this in terms of reuse, but what's your take on that?
Well, I think that we need to have the long-term goals, which are going for the cleanest tech we possibly can, using the least. So I think the hydrogen economy is important for us to stretch towards. But when we take this is a transition. We also have population growth in the world. So the demand for energy is growing as we speak. So we've got to cover all these things. But we've actually really got to get people to focus. Where is the long-term, the very best solutions? how do we do things with using the least of our resource? Resource will be needed to be used, it always has, but we use the least, we use the most reusable as well resource. Make sure that when we develop things, the resource can be used again when that need goes past. I think there's huge hope, and I don't think it's, as I would say, beyond the wit of man to discover the right way to go forward.
Okay, thank you, James. It's a really good thought to be nearly wrapping up, but I just want to ask Heidi, you mentioned a little bit earlier about how we need to learn from failures and successes. What would you be your big takeaway? Is there one big failure that you think everybody could learn from and not do again, or do you have a big success that you think actually, that's the big thought I want to end with?
That's a very, very good question. I think it's a bit early on with that question, so if you invite me next year, I'm sure I have a good answer to you.
Okay, thank you. Sigurd, what would you say your key takeaway is really when we're talking about moving to mixed solutions? What should people here, you think, really bear in mind first when they're starting on that journey, or perhaps they're midway through?
I think it's a very human approach that we perform best when we have to. And now we have to. It's not discussion if we should do anything. We have to do all of it faster. And I think that instead of using our resources on enhancing the environmental profile on oil and gas, we need to use them on alternative energy production so we can close the gap.
Thank you. Sharla?
I think it's not just the mixed energy solutions, but it's there's a term we use back home a lot called the two-eyed perspective, and that's bringing in the knowledge of indigenous knowledge, but also Western knowledge, and those two need to work together because they balance each other out better. And it's just a humanistic approach. This is a human problem, and if we're able to sit and talk and share each other's expertise, then we could move forward in a good way.
Great, thank you. And finally, Chris.
Well, one of the things I heard this week was innovation is not born out of conservatism, and we need bold action, and I totally agree with that. We are in a situation we have to move quickly, and if we can get more people to move quickly with us, it'll accelerate the effort.
And going to give the last word to James.
Well, thank you very much. That's really good, because a year ago I stood in my garden and looked up to the sky, and a flock of Arctic geese on their way from Iceland to England for the winter were flowing together, and the form they take, and they have one in the front in the vanguard, and it breaks the air for the rest, and they form this, they travel together. The one at the front's not always there, they fold back into the formation, and I think that's where we've got to go as communities, we've got to go there as regions. We're on a journey together, and for us to get to the destination, we've all got to support each other, take our moment in the lead, and work together to make sure that the journey is complete.
Thank you. That was a great thought to end on. So, James, thank you very much, and thank you to all of the panelists. It's been really, really insightful. So thank you for sharing all of your stories and examples. Thank you. So, Andrea, so much to talk about there. You could have kept going for ages, and you're going to be picking up some of these themes, aren't you, on Talk TV?
I will indeed. Before I do so, I will also take a bold action and ask everyone to be back here at 1:30 sharp. So we really want to start at 1:30 sharp so we can also conclude rather sharply. So please be back, and before I can do it later. People are excited for lunch.
No, do it now.
Should I do it now? We will continue the discussion. So if you still want to hear what we do next, the discussion on collaboration on the blue economy and the sustainable just transition will continue between Norway, Arctic Frontiers, and Scotland in March. So this March, stay tuned, follow us online, our newsletter. You will hear more about future collaboration between Norway and Scotland.
And we've got the Big Picture Science coming up in an hour, so please do come back for that. Enjoy your lunch.
Climate change in the Arctic is a significant new era of resilience we may not have seen before. But this is an opportunity to create agency in the Arctic with solutions such as precipitation mitigation. This also allows other countries and regions to learn from us in this initiative of ownership.
My vision for the Arctic region is one where scientists, local land users, and Indigenous governments cooperate and communicate more effectively to increase scientific impact and promote sustainable development.
I think the future opportunities in the Arctic are embedded in indispensable knowledge of how to cultivate a resilient multi-species habitat.
Aquaplaniva is a private R&D institute that provides research and advisory services for all water-related issues. In the context of the green conversion of all kinds of businesses that also the research sector has needed to adapt, Aquaplaniva has embraced this challenge, and we have in the last years acquired many new technologies that have allowed our scientists to collect data remotely and CO2 neutral by using unmanned vehicles such as this one. These vehicles are called gliders, and they do not use fossil fuels. They use natural energy sources to propel themselves and to power batteries for sensors and data collection. We can pilot and monitor everything from here, which is our control room in our offices in Tromsø. Some of our vessels are operating at the ocean surface, and some can dive as deep as 1,000 meters. They are rigged with multiple sensors that can collect data about both the physical and the biological characteristics of the ecosystem. The industry expressed a very strong interest in such technology in order to generate new approaches in environmental monitor for a real-time decision-making process. Currently, we're working for ConocoPhillips to monitor the environmental effects from produced water discharge and seismic activity around the oil installations at Ekofisk in the middle of the North Sea. These vehicles are both robust and performant, and they have a long autonomy at sea. They have crossed long distances, both in the North Sea and in the Barents Sea, to reach a sampling area from a remote deployment point. For Equinor, we have been studying the potential effect of an offshore wind park on fish aggregations. Hywind Scotland, the first world wind farm with floating turbines, is located just outside of Peterhead in the UK. Here we use echo sounder technology mounted on a sailboat glider to look at plankton and fish densities in the water column all the way to the seafloor. Technologies, coupled to a cloud-based visualization portal, will empower stakeholders to make real-time decisions and generate a blue economy with a net zero carbon footprint.
Welcome back. Final Break TV session of this year's Arctic Frontiers 2023 conference. I hope you enjoyed our energy big picture session. Plenty to discuss, plenty to grasp actually, both as a researcher, as I guess as an industry stakeholder. I have a couple of people here that we're going to help me reflect on what we have heard right now. To my right, I have Tuane Haverstad, who is the acting CEO of NORCE, which is a research institution here in Tromsø. Welcome. I'll start with you first, and then I'll continue to my emerging leaders to my left. Tuane, we've heard a lot about global demand, how the outside affects the Arctic. We heard a lot about regional initiatives and how we should better share knowledge, best practice. Like, from your perspective as a CEO of a research institution, like, what is your role in that entire inside-outside, bringing knowledge together setting?
I would say that our biggest role and responsibility is actually to be a bridge between the research and the public sector and the industry, to support and create new and innovative solutions into the green shift. So on the other hand, if I go back to the global views we heard about today, I must say that the presentation and elaboration around this mineral need for the future to support the green shift is really an important topic that we have really to look into.
Do you think the Arctic, we as an Arctic community, are ready for that outside perspective on the regional development here?
Actually, on the same level as we see in other places in Western Europe, I think we are ready. I think we are looking after good solution, and I'm pretty sure that we can create them as well. But it will take time.
It will take time. Taking time. What will we discuss in 5-10 years then from now? What we have, based on what we have heard today, you think the discussion will? In which way do you think the discussion will move forward? You know?
You can think two ways. One way could be that why didn't we do it faster? On the other hand, we have this sort of social acceptance issue, which we have seen many times in the past that we haven't taken seriously enough. And that aspect, together with the environmental aspect, we just need to have those priorities with us all the time.
That brings me to our emerging leaders. Like, moving forward, you know, energy transition, just energy transition. You thought a lot about that. First, let me quickly introduce Freya Sykes, who is a PhD candidate here at UIT, marine ecology. We talked about that. And then Malcolm Hodges, who is a researcher at the Geological Survey of Norway. So you have spent now a week, I think it was a week, a couple of days, with some of your peers thinking about just transition, the future of the Arctic, based on the work you do in a regular life outside the Arctic frontiers. What are your thoughts on what we have heard today, what you have contemplated over the last week? Maybe Freya, we'll start with you.
I mean, I think one of the things that came up at the moment is that even in my own research, and a lot of it is looking at how the ocean has changed in response to a warming climate, is that we ourselves actually require a lot of energy to carry out that research. And I think that's a really important thing to bear in mind, that even in the process of reaching this just energy transition, we are still going to be using and consuming a significant amount of resources to reach that. I think one of the projects we talked about is a green transition in Lofoten, this idea that they're going to be electrifying the islands, but to get there is still going to require significant resources. And I think we need to think, where are these coming from? How are we using them? And can we balance the needs and the requirements of actually achieving these goals that we have?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question as well, and I think it's really interesting to see in Norway the complexity of the discussions between Norway's role in the current energy situation as we enter this shift or transition, and then in the future beyond that. And I think Olivia raised a really interesting point today about how we move from one source of energy to others, and making sure how we can do this carefully and sustainably, and in a way that's fair and equitable for everyone.
On that move forward, you know, what is your guys' role as emerging leaders to communicate that complex transition, you know? Like, what do you think you will be as future leaders in 5 years, 10 years from now, say to your future emerging leaders then, you know?
Okay, sorry. Well, I certainly hope that 10 years from now, we're continuing to see this really strong dialogue of involvement of local populations and indigenous populations and youth populations, who will ultimately bear many of the consequences and the impacts of what we're discussing today. So I think I really hope to see a lot of improvement and continuation in this area.
I would just further that and say I think there's a really increasing awareness that actually the people who are living with these consequences are the ones that should be being consulted in these decisions. And I think it's really wonderful that we've had such a strong panelist of indigenous people, that we as young people have been invited along and been asked to consult on these issues. And I think that is really the way forward, to think, well, we are the ones living with these decisions and we're the ones living with these effects, and thus we should be a part of this story.
Be a part and share the knowledge, you know. Maybe a final question to Anne then, like, we heard a lot about lack of young people, lack of people up here. Do you also see that on the research field, like in your daily work, that you need more capacity, more human power to support your ideas as a research institute?
I think we have a pretty good balance. For sure, to work with research for the bigger question for the future is very attractive for young, clever people. So maybe we have a benefit from that. On the other hand, it's also related to how much investments are we as a nation or a community putting into the research and innovation work. And that is questionable. Should we do more? Yes, we should. In fact, and with the transition we are moving into now, it's just an enormous challenge the whole world.
And how can we communicate that challenge? Thank you very much to all of you. I know it's lunch break and we all want to go there as well and join the rest of the audience. Thank you very much to all of you who have followed Break TV and Arctic Frontiers Big Picture sessions online. See you soon at the last session, and then I see you soon, or I see you next year when you join us here physically for Arctic Frontiers 2024. Thank you very much.
As well as the renewables, and maybe the first regional test bed for the green transformations.
My vision for Arctic is that it will serve as a center for scientific research and a front runner for sustainable development. Arctic is vital in regulating the global climate. Shifting science and technology towards the north can help combat climate change.
My vision for the Arctic is to create an environment that both protects and enhances the natural beauty of the region, while also providing meaningful economic opportunities. These opportunities include sustainable tourism and renewable energy production, which can provide jobs and revenue for the people of the Arctic as well as those outside of the Arctic.
My vision for the Arctic is a great place to work and live. Modern and inclusive societies offering extraordinary nature experience in everyday life. Arctic is cool and a bit cold.
I envision the Arctic to be a future green energy hub and competence area that can attract youth from all over the world. I also see the Arctic as one of the most interesting places to live and work in, both now and in the future.
I think the future opportunities in the Arctic will be found in sustainable work and value creation. We must develop low emissions solutions and make use of technological innovation to foster green growth that will benefit both the people and the climate of the Arctic.
Future opportunities in the Arctic are advancing research in changing climate and implementing clean energy in cold and remote regions. My vision for the future in the Arctic is prioritizing youth leadership and community energy production.
Meticulous work, removing layers of snow and fern before reaching the deeper, more stable layers of ice. Each layer of snow has its own chemistry and texture, summer snow differing from winter snow. The new ice core from northeast Greenland will provide an invaluable climate archive, including a 100,000-year-long history of changes in temperature and greenhouse gases trapped in the ancient snow. Observing deformation of the cores and boreholes will tell scientists more about the dynamics and motion of the ice. Deep down, these close to 3,000 meters of glacier ice shape a vertical timeline of past climates. But before revealing the secrets of the ice, a lot of preparations need to be done. The Greenland climate is harsh, but still, the temperature at the surface is too warm for the scientists to work on the ice cores without damaging them. To protect the ice cores from melting, they need to be analyzed and stored in large tunnels below the ground. Inflatable balloons, the size of a large bus, are dug down and covered with snow. After a few hours in the cold climate, the snow roof stabilizes and the balloons can be deflated. The researchers now have the perfect base for carrying out their work.